Welcome back to I Completed 80s Music. In this episode, we'll be diving into the second half of Playlist 7. The links for both Apple Music and Spotify are in the episode description. Are you ready for some dad rock? How about some new wave? Let's get into it. So there I am, scrolling through the endless jukebox of 1980, the year Reagan got elected, Pac-Man took over arcades, and Post-it notes became a thing, because apparently we needed those. And here comes Siouxsie, swanning in like a gothic superhero, flanked by her merry band of dark-hearted misfits. Siouxsie and the Banshees dropping Happy House on an unsuspecting world. Released on March the 7th, 1980, this is not just a song, it's a cunningly packaged middle finger wrapped in unsettling cheer. This is track 8, Playlist 7. Come on, get happy. Let's get one thing straight. This is not the kind of happy you send Hallmark cards about. Siouxsie herself called it sarcastic, describing the track as a critique of the idyllic facade of urban life. You know, the white picket fences, the perfectly manicured lawns, the smiling faces, hiding the quiet despair of lives too polished to be real. This was the UK, Thatcher's Britain, with all its grimness and rising unemployment, where the fantasy of domestic bliss felt like a cruel joke to so many. But here's the genius. The song sounds happy. It's like the world's creepiest bait and switch. It kicks off with a hypnotic guitar riff, courtesy of John McGeoch, the Banshees' new guitarist at the time. This guy, let's just call him a wizard, injects this weird, scratchy joy into the melody. McGeoch was fresh off a stint with Magazine, where he'd already proven himself as a magician of post-punk guitar. His style here is angular, yet somehow danceable, like a cubist painting that makes you want to shake your hips. And the rhythm section, Steve Severin's bass, is sultry and slinky, locking in with Budgie's drums, which pulse behind this tribal, minimalist groove. This was Budgie's first single with the band, and let's just say he announced himself with authority. The man was like a human metronome, but one that could conjure a voodoo spell while keeping perfect time. And then, over all this infectious weirdness, there's Siouxsie herself. Her voice is like a blade, cutting, theatrical, full of icy charisma. She sings about the happy house like she's leading a twisted carnival parade, sneering and mocking but never outright condemning. She doesn't have to. The cracks in the illusion are already clear. It's also worth mentioning the visuals here. The music video, directed by Paul Henry, shows the band in this warped, cartoonish dollhouse. All bright colours, surreal imagery, which only underscores the sinister undercurrent of the song. Siouxsie, with her punk kabuki makeup and wild hair, looks like she's hosting some dystopian children's show. It's disturbing, hilarious, and perfect. And let's not forget the cultural context. 1980 was ground zero for the post-punk explosion. Joy Division were about to release Closer. The Cure was on the rise. Public Image Limited was reinventing what a band could even be. And here was Siouxsie and the Banshees, threading the needle between punk's raw energy and goth's theatrical darkness, while still managing to make charting credible music. We'll be hearing a lot of the Banshees on this podcast, by the way. Happy House climbed to number 17 on the UK singles chart, which is both impressive and baffling because it's not exactly top of the pops material. But maybe that's the point. In the years since, Happy House has become a cornerstone of post-punk, influencing everyone from Trent Reznor to Karen O. And why wouldn't it? It's catchy, yet unnerving, joyful, yet bleak. A song that dares you to smile, even as it peels back the veneer of everything we pretend is okay. Happy House is the ultimate reminder that happiness, like suburbia, is sometimes just an illusion. And Siouxsie and the Banshees are here to let you know it's okay to revel in the chaos instead. Stay tuned for more tales from the post-punk crypt, where the eyeliner is heavy and the guitars are jagged, and the happiness is always suspect. Moving on to track 9, the first two slices of dad rock. Don your leather driving gloves with the string back for extra purchase, a la Alan Partridge. Make a plastic flask of car coffee and buy some artificial tasting ham sandwiches for the ultimate 80s authenticity. Firstly, we're talking about a track that's both deceptive and disarming, sleek yet peculiar. The 1980 single, Turn It On Again by Genesis. This is Genesis at a fascinating crossroads. A prog rock behemoth, streamlining their sound, teetering on the precipice of pop dominance, without entirely letting go of their labyrinthine past. If you've ever tapped your foot along to this song, congratulations, you've already been outwitted. Turn It On Again is in 13/4 time. Let me say that again, 13/4 time, as if that's a thing. You don't tap your foot to 13/4, it taps you, or maybe trips you. This isn't just a song, it's a rhythmical prank wrapped in arena rock clothing. Let's zoom in on some of the context here. Genesis, by this point a three-piece lineup of Phil Collins, Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, is in the midst of transitioning from their more esoteric Peter Gabriel-fronted prog roots into a more commercial yet deeply intricate sound. We met Peter a while ago with Games Without Frontiers on Playlist 6. Turn It On Again is the lead single from their album Duke, an album that somehow marries radio-friendly hooks with the kind of musical nerdery that still gets prog fans misty-eyed. The song opens, or rather accelerates, like a Ford Capri on an empty M1 at sunrise, with that steady driving guitar and then jangly keyboard opening. Then in comes Phil Collins. Phil Collins before peak Phil Collins. That's about 5 years away, folks. His voice oscillating between desperation and charisma, channeling both a romantic longing and a subtle jab at modern media obsession. All I need is a TV show, that and the radio, he sings. Sounding like a man at once lost in the artificial glow of entertainment and painfully aware of how it keeps him company. It's worth noting that this was one of the first Genesis tracks where Collins began to define the sound of their new era. Remember, Phil was still learning how to be a frontman. He'd taken over vocal duties full-time after Peter Gabriel left. But Turn It On Again is one of those moments where you can hear him not just stepping into the spotlight, but downright owning it. The brilliance of Turn It On Again lies in how it always wrong-foots you. The verses are in 13/4, which Collins himself has described as feeling like a constant stumble. It doesn't resolve the way your brain thinks it will. The chorus flips back to a more conventional 4/4 time signature, like Genesis just decided to throw us a bone. It's a jarring but exhilarating shift, like you've been wrestling with an unsolvable Rubik's Cube, only to have it magically click into place for a few fleeting moments. Now, the Duke album was a turning point for Genesis commercially, and Turn It On Again helped solidify their transition from a cult prog band to mainstream rock stars. It peaked at number 8 on the UK singles chart, marking their first real chart success as a trio. While it didn't break as big in the US, it became a staple of their live shows. The band would stretch it into medleys during concerts, mixing in covers of old rock and roll hits, turning Turn It On Again into a kind of impromptu rock history lesson. And let's not forget the lyrics. There's a loneliness to this song, a narrator who's glued to the glow of their TV, addicted to the illusion of connection. This theme of disconnection, whether through technology, fame or modern life, is something Genesis would return to often, but here it's tinged with a knowing wink. How apt that we now live in our phones and social connection is achieved on an app. So where does Turn It On Again sit in the Genesis canon? Is it prog? Is it pop? Is it a giant middle finger to time signatures everywhere? Yes, and absolutely. It's the kind of song that shows you can still play with structure and complexity even when you're writing something destined for the top 40 radio, and that's why it belongs in our pantheon of 80s music. I don't know if you're lucky enough to still have your father with us. I hope so. But here's to the dads who would have loved driving to this song, but can no longer hear it. Here's to the salesmen, the engineers, the company directors, the factory managers. We miss you. We miss you. We will always miss you. And if that's you who have suffered loss, go and find an open road at sunset or sunrise and put on this song loud. Continuing our dad rock evolution, now we skip over the ocean to Canada. It's time for a love letter to rock, radio, and the weirdos who listen. Here's something as explosively Canadian as maple syrup on a hockey puck. Rush's The Spirit of Radio. This is track 10, playlist 7. Now, Permanent Waves, the album that birthed this sonic anomaly, was released on January the 1st, 1980, a literal New Year's Day baby, and The Spirit of Radio was its bouncing, boisterous lead single. Right from the first note, it's like a jolt of caffeine with a side of existential dread. It's a song that crams more riffs into 5 minutes than most bands can muster in an entire album. Alex Lifeson, take a bow because that intro, sharp, clean, a little bit cocky, still feels like a guitarist flexing their pecs 45 years later. Let's start with the title. It's not just a phrase, it's a feeling. It's about that old school thrill of tuning in to your local FM rock station and hearing something that feels like it's coming through just for you. Rush wrote it as a tribute to Toronto's CFNY FM, a station that championed eclecticism before that word became a Spotify playlist buzzword. Back then, radio wasn't just where you found music. It was a lifeline for weirdos, nerds, and anyone searching for a tribe. You can hear that passion in every second of this song. Geddy Lee's voice, I mean, what can you say? You either love it or you're wrong. His helium-high wails, somehow both operatic and feral, cut through the mix like a preacher delivering gospel to the congregation. And then there's Neil Peart. What can be said about the late great Professor himself? Every snare hit on this track feels like he's recalibrating the universe. And the lyrics. They start out celebratory, praising radio as the friendly voice of freedom. But by the end, Lee can't resist a jab at the commercialization of art. Glittering prizes and endless promises shatter the illusion of integrity. Mic drop. And just when you think you've got the song figured out, in comes the curveball. A reggae breakdown. Yes, reggae. Why? Because Rush could, and because they knew it would drive the prog purists insane. It's cheeky, it's unexpected, and it somehow works because Rush has always been about bending the rules, not following them. Chart-wise, this was a milestone. It didn't blow up on the Billboard Hot 100. Rush has always been a cult favourite, more than a pop juggernaut. But it hit number 51 in the US and climbed to 22 in their native Canada. More importantly, it became a live staple, a guaranteed crowd pleaser that Geddy, Alex and Neil would rip through with joyful abandon night after night. But here's the kicker. The Spirit of Radio was a manifesto. Rush had always been outliers, appealing to the geeky kids who played Dungeons and Dragons in their parents' basement, while everyone else was at the Kiss concert. But with this new track, they planted their flag. They weren't just a prog band, they were a band, period. And they were willing to go wherever their muse took them, whether it was a reggae riff or a science fiction epic about trees. So, what does the Spirit of Radio mean today, in an era when FM rock stations have been eclipsed by algorithms and streaming platforms? Maybe it's a reminder of the human connection behind all the noise. Maybe it's a throwback to a time when radio wasn't just about pushing ads for car dealerships, but sharing music that felt like a revelation. Or maybe it's just a killer song that makes you want to air drum your way through a traffic jam. Either way, the Spirit of Radio isn't just a Rush classic. It's a hymn for anyone who's ever heard a song and felt like it was written just for them. It's the spirit of band, the spirit of music, and of course, the spirit of radio. Next up, we're going deep on a track that flew under the radar for too many of us, though it probably should have been one of the biggest songs of 1980. I'm talking about Hymn by Rupert Holmes. the master of catchy theatrical pop, the guy who wrote Escape, the Pina Colada song. Yes, that Rupert Holmes. But him is a different beast entirely. It's not the breezy pop ditty you probably associate with him. No, this track is dark, brooding, introspective, and wildly ahead of its time. This is track 11. Released in 1980, Him is the second single from Rupert Holmes' album Eye to Eye, and it's a track that pushes the boundaries of what pop music was doing back then. If you're picturing him just riding on the Pina Colada wave, you're in for a surprise. Him is a haunting, sweeping ballad that's more philosophical than it is catchy. Think of it as a song with regret. Holmes weaves a complicated narrative of desire, dismissal, and longing. The track's concept is as twisted as it is emotional. It's about a love triangle, but not the typical kind. It's about an obsessive, impossible searching for someone else's lover, someone who remains just out of reach, someone who's always there, lurking in the background of your mind. There's an interesting, almost eerie detachment in Rupert Holmes' delivery of the lyrics. He sings about this mysterious man, him, with a kind of yearning, but also a cold distance. It's a bit like looking at a beautiful painting from across the room, knowing your painting will never match up to it. The lyrics are poetic, but also quietly unsettling. He's just too perfect to be real. It's almost as if Holmes is not singing to or about a person, but an idea of perfection, a figure of desire that exists purely in the mind, in the fantasy. This kind of emotional push-pull, that blend of being something you can't be and knowing you shouldn't even want it, was really ahead of its time in pop music. It's vulnerable yet obsessive. It's a love song, but also a cruel critique of the very concept of love. What makes this song stand out in Rupert Holmes' catalogue and in pop music in general is how it subverts expectations. It's dramatic, lush, almost theatrical, but it's also so rich with tension. While Escape, the Pina Colada song, is all about carefree fun and getting out of a dull relationship, Him goes into the deep complexities of love, jealousy, and unrequited passion. If you listen to the track, you'll hear this progression. It starts relatively simple with gentle instrumentation, but as it builds, so does the emotional weight. The orchestration becomes bigger, the lyrics get darker, and by the end, you're left with this sweeping, cinematic feeling. It's like Rupert Holmes took everything that was good about pop music in the 70s, that smooth, almost loungy sound, and then transformed it into something with real substance. And talking about the production, if there's one thing Rupert Holmes knew how to do, it was build an atmosphere. The song starts with a soft, almost whispering keyboard and drums. Pour yourself a whiskey, why don't you? Gradually building up with lush strings and soft percussion. The arrangement is so full and immersive, it feels like a fever dream in a pop song. It's polished, yes, but there's this underlying rawness that you can't quite shake. You're not just hearing the music, you're hearing the ache in the music, the longing in every chord. Now let's talk about the live music video. It's so perfectly 1980s, with Rupert Holmes in a dimly lit, smoky studio room, looking deep into the camera as he sings about this mysterious hymn. There's a bit of that movie star energy here, a sense of Holmes positioning himself not just as a pop star, but as a performer. Someone who's willing to give you more than just the song. It's like he's pulling you into his world, making you feel that same sense of confusion, obsession, and emotional push-pull he's singing about. The video doesn't shy away from the strange tension at the heart of the song. It's moody, introspective, and I'll say it again, just a little bit unsettling. Here's the kicker though. Him was not a hit. Despite all of this emotional complexity, all of this musical sophistication, the single peaked only at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100, which, in most cases would be seen as a big success. But when you compare it to Escape, which hit number 1, you realise how much Him was underrated, and it barely charted in the UK. It's this rich, multi-layered pop song that just didn't quite fit into the pop landscape of 1980. It was too deep for the mainstream, too introspective. The world wanted something more like the carefree vibes of the Pina Colada, not a complex meditation on desire and heartbreak. In a way, Him was too ahead of its time, a slow burn in a decade more obsessed with fast tempos and easy hooks. So why does this song matter today? Well, like so many songs from the past that weren't fully appreciated in their moment, Him is a perfect example of how pop music can evolve beyond its formulas, how it can actually say something. It's a piece of work that tells a story, explores the darker corners of the heart, and makes you think. In a world of instant gratification and pop hooks, this is a song that invites you to sit with your emotions, even if they make you uncomfortable. But that's what makes Rupert Holmes such a fascinating artist. He could give us Escape, the ultimate feel-good anthem, but then turn around and hit us with Him, a song that is much more about feeling than it is about catchy choruses or radio play. It's a song for the hopeless romantics, the people who know that love isn't just about sweetness. It's complicated, it's messy, it's sometimes unhealthy, and maybe that's what makes Him such a classic. It's a pop song that isn't afraid to feel. Next up, one of the most captivating songs of 1980. We're talking about Dexys Midnight Runners and their 1980 smash hit single Geno, not Come on Eileen, mind you. This is the other Dexys hit. You know, the one that hit #1 on the UK singles chart before the Dungaree Revolution. The one that sounds like a sweaty, boozy love letter to soul, dipped in the glorious chaos of post-punk Britain. This is track 12, playlist 7. Before we get to the song itself, let's rewind to how this ragtag band of misfits came together in the first place. Dexys Midnight Runners were born in Birmingham, England in 1978, out of frustration, ambition, and an almost religious devotion to the power of music. At the centre of it all was Kevin Rowland, a former hairdresser with a chip on his shoulder and a vision in his heart. Rowland had tried his hand at punk with a band called the Killjoys, but he quickly grew disillusioned with the scene's cynicism. What he wanted was something real, something pure. Enter Kevin Al Archer, guitarist and co-founder of Dexys, who shared Rowland's obsession with the raw emotion of 1960s soul music. The pair recruited a band, pulling in anyone who could match their intensity, musically or otherwise. They named themselves after Dexedrine, the amphetamine pills beloved by northern soul dancers, and added Midnight Runners to evoke the image of a restless, driven gang charging through the night. From the beginning, Dexys were more than just a band. They were a mission. Rowland imposed strict discipline, no drugs, no booze, and a commitment to perfection that bordered on the tyrannical. He even demanded the band train like athletes to build up the stamina needed for their fiery live performances. Their sound was a volatile mix of punk energy and soul's deep emotional pull. Imagine a brass section wailing like they're leading a New Orleans funeral march, but the band behind them is sprinting at full speed. Dexys wanted to make you feel something, whether it was joy, rage or heartbreak, and they were willing to break a sweat to do it. Which brings us to Geno. It's April 1980, and somewhere in this chaos of economic and political instability, Dexys Midnight Runners release their second single, and it becomes the anthem they didn't know they needed. Geno. It's a chant, a battle cry, a feverish ode to the past. It's a love song disguised as a cultural manifesto. And its target is one man, Geno Washington. Not Washington, D.C., not George Washington. Geno Washington, the American-born, UK-based soul singer who ruled the British club scene in the mid-1960s. Picture it, Geno, in his heyday, strutting across the stage with the Ram Jam band, igniting dance floors with raw, unfiltered energy. For teenage Kevin Rowland, growing up in the drab confines of Birmingham, Geno Washington wasn't just a performer, he was a revelation. The song itself is a triumph of contradictions. On one hand, it's a hyper-specific homage to Geno Washington. The opening line, back in '68 in a sweaty club, drops you straight into the thick of Kevin Rowland's teenage obsession. But on the other hand, it's a universal cry of longing for something bigger, brighter, more alive than what you've ever got. It's about music as salvation, about being 14 years old and feeling something so deeply that it imprints on your DNA forever. Musically, Geno is Dexys at their most raw and brassy. It's built around an insistent stomping rhythm with a horn section that practically demands your attention. It's bold, it's brash, and it's unapologetically soulful. Rowland's voice is a thing of wild beauty, half sneer, half wail, all passion. And let's not forget the call and response vocals, which give the whole thing a kind of communal, almost gospel-like urgency. The track was released on April the 11th, 1980, as the second single from Dexy's debut album, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels. It shot straight to number 1 in the UK, and holding the top spot for 2 glorious weeks. This is no small feat for a band that had essentially willed itself into existence through sheer force of Kevin Rowland's personality. Geno isn't just a tribute, it's a declaration of intent. It's Dexys staking their claim as the inheritors of a soul tradition, while simultaneously reinventing it for a new generation. It's messy, it's heartfelt, and it's utterly singular, and ultimately and sadly, while the single was a huge success, it ultimately failed in its mission. Soul would mutate into something else in the 80s and leave Dexys behind eventually. But before that, we have Come On Eileen to come. As it happens, I think Geno is the better song. So next time someone tries to reduce Dexy's Midnight Runners to a one-hit wonder, pull out Geno, play it loud, feel the horns, the swagger, the defiant joy, and remember, Kevin Rowland is a man who once said, "We're not messing around, we're going to fight for this music." With Geno, they didn't just fight, they won. They briefly became a shining beacon forever in the course of 1980s. And for that, they are a Pantheon 80s entry. Finally today, our track 13. A massive hit, an anthem for the disenchanted. 2 fingers up at Thatcher's government, and somewhere in the bustling streets of Woking, Surrey, the Jam were crafting a sonic Molotov cocktail. Enter Going Underground, a track so incendiary, so caustic, so quintessentially the Jam, that it exploded into Britain's cultural consciousness and rocketed straight to number 1 on the UK singles chart, their first single to do so. No, it didn't climb there. It arrived like a declaration, stamped and sealed with Paul Weller's angst. Give it a listen now. This wasn't supposed to happen. The plan was to release Dreams of Children as the A-side, a slightly psychedelic, distorted romp through youthful idealism and disillusionment. But then, almost by accident, Going Underground pulled rank and took over. A tale as old as rock itself. Radio DJs and fans latched onto the flip side of the double A side, and the rest is history. It's a rare triumph for the so-called B-side, which has to make you wonder if the single itself was a metaphor for flipping the status quo on its head. Going Underground is a manifesto. 3 minutes and 5 seconds of pure disdain for complacency, for consumerism, for the political apathy of the masses. Paul Weller, barely 21 years old at the time, sings as though he's already seen enough of the world to know it's a mess. The public wants what the public gets, he sneers, his voice cutting like a razor blade, sharpened on Thatcherite austerity. This isn't punk's nihilism, it's mod revival rebellion, polished and precise, delivered with a clenched jaw and a perfectly tailored blazer. Bruce Foxton's bass line punches through the track like a boxer on speed, and Rick Buckler's drumming is relentless, a military march for the disaffected. Together, they create a driving rhythm, tight and infectious, like the Kinks if they ditched the nostalgia and gone straight for the jugular. Weller's guitar doesn't just accompany, it slices through the melody with a serrated edge. The song is sharp, urgent, and unapologetically British. The lyrics are where the magic and fury really collide. Weller is exasperated, spitting lines like, "You choose your leaders and place your trust, as their lies wash you down and their promises rust." It's not a request for a change, It's a call to arms, a demand to wake up. This is no lovey-dovey pop tune. It's a rallying cry for anyone feeling crushed under the weight of societal expectations. And it resonated with a generation who were tired of being told to sit down and shut up. And let's talk about that title, Going Underground. It's defiant, it's literal. This isn't about retreating, it's about finding a space to regroup, a counterculture resistance against the shallow and the saccharine. It's punk ethos channeled through the sharp aesthetic of the mods, more Fred Perry polo than safety pin. The Jam were already a force to be reckoned with by 1980. They had 3 albums under their belt, including All Mod Cons and Setting Suns, both brimming with societal commentary and sharp melodies. But Going Underground was a tipping point, a perfect storm of anger and artistry that cemented their place as not just a band, but a voice of their generation. It's worth noting that the Jam's meteoric rise didn't exactly include America. Over in the States, they were more cult than mainstream, an oddity in a sea of arena rock and burgeoning new wave. But in Britain, they were everything. Youth and style and politics rolled into one impeccably dressed package. And here's the thing, Going Underground still feels relevant. 40 plus years later, it's hard not to hear Weller's frustration and think, oh yeah, we're still here, aren't we? Different leaders, same rusting promises. It's a song that reminds us that sometimes when the world feels like it's gone mad, Going Underground isn't just an escape, it's a strategy. God knows how many times this song has been played at indie clubs and indie nights. Hundreds of thousands, millions? If you say Jam, you say Going Underground. This is peak Jam. No one gets close to making this kind of political statement. They are a top-tier Pantheon entry. I'd argue there are perhaps better Jam songs, but this is their boilerplate. So cue it up, feel the urgency in every beat, every snarling lyric. Let it remind you that sometimes the best protest isn't screaming into the void, but strapping on a guitar, donning your sharpest suit, and saying, no thanks, we'll take it from here. Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time for Playlist 8. Keep spinning those records, and don't forget, sometimes the underground is where the real revolution begins. Take care.